Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Iran has vowed to strengthen its nuclear program, placing more advanced uranium enrichment centrifuges in the Natanz facility. In a joint news conference with his Russian counterpart in Tehran, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the Israeli attack on its key Natanz nuclear site will strengthen Iran's position in the Vienna talks. Earlier, Iran said the targeting of the facility with high risk of indiscriminate release of radioactive material is a war crime. Pakistan security forces have killed a terrorist during an intelligence-based operation in northwestern district of South Waziristan. In a statement, military's media wing said the killed terrorist was active member of the banned TTP group since 2006. ISPR said terrorist peer alias Assad was involved in attacks on security forces. Russia has warned the United States to ensure its warships stayed well away from Crimea for their own good. In a statement, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov called on the deployment in the Black Sea a provocation. He said active U.S. military support to Kyiv is a serious challenge for Russia's security. In the U.S. state of Minnesota, civil unrest has gripped a Minneapolis suburb for a second night after the police killing of an unarmed black man. Police fired tear gas and stun grenades as hundreds defied a curfew ordered by Governor Tim Walz. Police says the officer mistakenly opened fire on the victim with her gun instead of a taser. Meanwhile, police shot and killed a high school student in Knoxville, Tennessee after he opened fire on them, wounding an officer. India has again reported world's highest coronavirus infections today as more than 161,000 people tested positive. In Pakistan, 118 people lost their lives to the virus and over 4,300 tested positive since yesterday. The global number of coronavirus deaths is approaching 3 million, while caseload has topped 136 million. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Iran, which has vowed to reinforce its nuclear program by placing more advanced uranium enrichment centrifuges in the Natanz facility. In a joint news conference with his Russian counterpart in Tehran, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the Israeli attack on the key Natanz nuclear site will strengthen Tehran's position in the Vienna talks. Zarif also urged the EU to return to compliance with its obligations under the nuclear deal. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also criticized the European Union for imposing new sanctions on Iran. He said new curbs amid efforts to save the troubled nuclear agreements were unacceptable. During a two-day visit to Iran, Lavrov also met President Hassan Rouhani. Earlier, Iran said it is considering counter-sanctions in response to the new curbs imposed by Brussels. The bloc imposed sanctions on 8 Iranian commanders, including the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Hossein Salami. Now, Pakistan security forces have killed a terrorist during an intelligence-based operation in northwestern district of South Waziristan. The killed terrorist was active member of banned TTP's Baitullah Mahsood group since 2006. In a statement, the military's media wing said an operation was conducted in Ladha area of the district on the reported presence of the terrorists. ISPR said during intense exchange of fire, one terrorist named Pir alias Assad was shot dead. It added the terrorist was involved in attacks on the security forces. Now, Russia has warned the United States to ensure its warships stayed well away from Crimea for their own good. In a statement, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov called the deployment in the Black Sea a provocation. Ryabkov said active U.S. military support to Kyiv is a serious challenge for Russia's security. He added Russia would do everything possible to ensure its security in the event of an escalation in Ukraine. Ryabkov accused Washington and NATO of turning Ukraine into a powder keg with increasing arms supplies. However, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg called on Russia to withdraw troops from Ukraine's borders. Ukraine's foreign minister said all must act now to prevent escalation with Russia. Kuleba said Kyiv does not want war with Russia and will seek diplomatic solution. Now, China has urged the United States to refrain from playing with fire on the Taiwan issue. This comes after the US issued new guidelines that will enable its officials to meet more freely with Taiwanese officials. At a briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said Washington must immediately stop any form of US-Taiwan official contacts. He said China urges the US to not send wrong signals to Taiwan independence forces. Earlier today, Taiwan unveiled a new amphibious warfare ship that can be used to land troops. Formally naming the new ship, President Tsai Ing-wen said it will strengthen the Navy's ability and further solidify defenses. The ship will also bolster supply lines to vulnerable islands offshore China and in the South China Sea. Now, in the US state of Minnesota, civil unrest has gripped a Minneapolis suburb for a second night after the police killing of an unarmed black man. Police fired tear gas and stun grenades as hundreds defied a curfew ordered by Governor Tim Walz. Operation Safety Net said protesters launched bottles, fireworks, bricks and other projectiles at officials. Meanwhile, the city's police chief said the officer who killed Dawn Wright mistakenly opened fire with her gun instead of a taser. Minnesota's sports team in Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the National Hockey League have suspended their games. Wright was killed about 16 kilometers from the place where George Floyd was murdered last May. In another incident, police shot and killed a high school student in Knoxville, Tennessee, after he opened fire on them, wounding an officer. Knoxville police said they were responding after reports of a gunman at the school and found the suspect in a bathroom. Now, India has again reported the world's highest COVID-19 cases today as more than 161,000 people tested positive. The global number of coronavirus deaths is approaching 3 million, while the caseload has topped 136 million. More about the pandemic in this report. The global health institutions have once again warned that the pandemic is far from being over. Just as India overtook Brazil with the second highest number of infections, tens of thousands flouted COVID-19 SOPs as they gathered at the Indian Ganges River for the world's largest pilgrimage. Meanwhile, India has approved the use of Russian Sputnik V vaccine. Discrepancies surrounding the COVID-19 vaccines also continue to grow, as Australia has announced to not buy Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, further delaying its immunization drive. The World Health Organization has warned that infections are rising exponentially despite widespread countermeasures.
We are in a critical point of the pandemic right now. The trajectory of this pandemic is growing. In the 7th week in a row, we've had more than 4.4 million new cases reported in the last week. If you compare that to a year ago, we had about 500,000 cases being reported per week. Last week, we had 4.4 million cases. If you look on our website and you actually look at the epicurve and the trajectory of the pandemic right now, it is growing exponentially.
Europe has surpassed the grim milestone of 1 million coronavirus deaths just a day after easing of restrictions in the United Kingdom. The country logged the highest number of new cases since April 1st. However, a new study says a highly contagious variant first identified in Britain does not cause more severe disease in hospitalized patients. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has warned that the third wave of the pandemic can prove to be the toughest yet.
The number of infections is currently far too high. The use of intensive care units in our hospitals is increasing again, and we have to say that this third wave might turn out to be the toughest for us. And to break it, of course, the most important weapon we have is the vaccine, and testing helps us build a bridge until the inoculation works.
As countries scramble for vaccines amid shortages and financial shortcomings, the World Bank and Global Vaccine Alliance (Gavi) have urged the countries with excess vaccines to release them to poor states. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 118 more have died from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, taking the tally to 15,619. The Health Ministry says just over 4,300 tested positive overnight. The ministry said the nationwide caseload is approaching 730,000. It said out of this, more than 638,000 have recovered, while there are over 76,000 active cases. The ministry said more than 5,000 are hospitalized for the virus across the country. Now, Pakistan and Uzbekistan will hold a virtual summit on April 14th to review bilateral ties. Prime Minister Imran Khan and Uzbek President Shavkat Miromonovich will attend. Pakistan's Foreign Office says the two leaders will review trade, economic, political, security, connectivity and people-to-people exchanges. They said the two sides will focus on the Trans-Afghan Railway project. It was agreed between Islamabad and Tashkent earlier this year. The two leaders will also exchange views on regional and international issues. Muslims around the world are welcoming the fasting month of Ramadan. This is the second year that observers will have to navigate COVID-19 restrictions. Although governments have allowed religious congregations to some extent, they cannot be enjoyed in the old ways. Tarawih prayers were offered in Arab and Southeast Asian countries, including Indonesia. In Saudi Arabia, only vaccinated worshippers were allowed to enter the Grand Mosque in Makkah and the Prophet's Mosque in Medina. Iran has entered a 10-day lockdown and banned gatherings during the month of fasting. Palestinians prepared for the holy month with colorful lanterns and ornate decorations in the streets of Jerusalem. The mood in the old city was far more joyful than last year when prayers were suspended at Al-Aqsa Mosque. In Pakistan, Ramadan is starting from Wednesday, while authorities have allowed mosques to remain open with strict rules. Afghans mark the start of Ramadan with hope for peace and end of violence. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. Moving on with the news stories. Turkey says it's committed to a 2019 maritime demarcation deal in the eastern Mediterranean with Libya. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said this after meeting Libya's Prime Minister Abdülhamid Dbeibeh in Ankara. Speaking to the media, Erdogan said Turkish support for Libya prevented the fall of Tripoli. He also said that Ankara's backing ensured there were no new massacres in the war-torn country. Erdogan vowed to extend all support to Libya government of national unity. For his part, the visiting dignitary hailed Turkey's crucial role in ensuring a lasting ceasefire in Libya. Prime Minister Dbeibeh and a delegation of ministers are making their first visit to Turkey since taking office last month. Now in Russia, a firefighter has died and several others injured after a fire erupted at a historic factory in St. Petersburg. Authorities say the fire broke out over several floors of the building near the Neva River. As many as 40 people have been evacuated, while 2 firefighters have been hospitalized. The building used to be a state-run clothing factory in 1841 and was privatized in 1992. Now, in Argentina, 12 Magellanic penguins have been returned to the chilly seas of the Atlantic coast. They were rescued and rehabilitated from health issues, including malnutrition and anemia. Let's find out in this report. The boot-high penguins wadled down a windswept sandy beach after being released by conservationists. They paused for photos with onlookers before taking the plunge back into the sea and swimming off to freedom. The flightless birds were kept in rehabilitation after being rescued in a state of malnutrition and dehydration. They were treated with an adequate, balanced diet provided by a nutritionist and with a veterinary medical team. The Magellanic penguins are named after the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan, whose crew spotted them while sailing around the tip of South America. There are some 2.2 million to 3.2 million of these adult flightless seabirds. According to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, they are mostly found around Argentina and Chile. Now, South Korea and China have expressed concerns over Japan's decision to release radioactive water from the Fukushima plant into the sea. In a statement, Beijing said the leak has had far-reaching implications on the marine environment, food safety and human health. China's foreign ministry said Japan made the decision before exhausting all safe ways of disposal. It said Tokyo did not fully consult with neighboring countries and the international community. Meanwhile, Seoul said Japan's decision is unacceptable and summoned Japanese Ambassador Koichi Ebochi. Government Policy Coordination Minister Koo Yan-seol said Seoul will take every necessary measure of putting people's safety first. Now, New Zealand has become the first country to introduce a unique climate change law. The new legislation requires businesses and insurers to report the effect of climate change in their procedures. The bill will include banks, insurances and 200 major companies of New Zealand having total assets of $700 million and above. Climate Change Minister James Shaw said New Zealand cannot hit its zero carbon emission goal by 2050 without involving the business sector. Shaw further said that the law will bring climate risks and resilience into financial and business decision-making. The bill has been introduced in the New Zealand Parliament and is expected to receive its first reading this week. Russia has marked the 60th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's historic space flight by lighting up the sky with hundreds of drones. Gagarin became the first human to conquer space on 12th of April 1961. Let's find out about him in this report. Veliki Novgorod's residents admired the swarm drone display illuminating the skies, with the devices lined up in synchronized light displays, forming a rocket, satellite, and an orbital ship. Gagarin's success was one of the Soviet Union's most important Cold War victories. It was also a pivotal moment in Russia's space race, with the US his 108-minute orbit around the Earth and his Vostok 1 rocket propelled him to international fame. Vostok 1 was Gagarin's only spaceflight, but he served as the backup crew to the Soyuz 1 mission, which ended in a fatal crash, killing his friend and fellow cosmonaut. Fearing for his life, Soviet officials permanently banned Gagarin from further spaceflight. After completing training at the Air Force Engineering Academy in 1968, he was allowed to fly regular aircraft. Gagarin died 5 weeks later when the MiG-15 training jet he was piloting crashed near the town of Kirshak. Now, age is not a constraint for the elderly members of a workout club in China's capital, Beijing, in meeting their strength and fitness goals. Let's find out in this report. From their top-notch physiques and the massive weights they lift, it is hard to guess that these men are mostly 60 or above. The men gather each afternoon at the gym located at an old bicycle shed in southwest Beijing. The photos of bodybuilding greats pasted on the wall motivate them as they pump iron. Members say they work out for multiple reasons, including prevention and recovery from illness.
If elderly people do some strength exercises, their muscles will be more developed. Once the muscles are more developed, the body will have more energy. Then we'll be happy if we are in a spirited mood, right? If we are happy, then the quality of life when I'm old will be high. There are two benefits. First, I won't suffer from illness. And second, I'm not causing trouble for the family.
Many club members were young men in their 20s and 30s when it was founded in 1984 by Chang Wei, the winner of Beijing's first long-distance race in 1956. Its decades-old, rust-stained equipment was built from scrap metal from a nearby railway wagon factory where they used to work.
In the factory where we came from, there was a lot of different specialized workers. For example, I was the fitter and he was the washer. This brother here was a forger, and these weights were made from their workshop. He made all of these. We had the electrician and the bricklayer help us to build the gym. We all did it by ourselves.
The gym has never been closed in its near 40-year history, not even during the ongoing pandemic. Its annual membership fee is just $46, but it is free for students, people aged 80 or above, and those who are unemployed. Well, now, like any other businesses, Union Square's Green Market has also been very slow during the pandemic. But bees, honey and veggies seem to have kept the market alive by attracting some customers. With the sprawling city skyline as his backdrop, Andrew Cote tends to his beehives on the rooftop of a 38-story residential building in Manhattan. Cote has over 60 beehives on rooftops and in the community gardens throughout New York City. Once the bees used to make enough honey for Cote to harvest, usually in July and September, only a portion of that honey is sold at his stand at the Union Square Green Market.
2 boxes behind me, that's for the bees. That's all for the bees. So if it's brood, if it's pollen, if it's honey, that's for the bees. I'll add a 3rd box, usually a shorter one called a medium or maybe called a shallow, and that honey will be for us to harvest. So we take a very small amount of the honey.
At the Union Square Green Market, Cote says Andrew's honey had their best sales day in 13 months in late March, but it was a low bar. While some are hopeful that business activities are gradually gaining pace, others are not satisfied. Manager of Norwich Meadows Farm, Tenzin Thokme, says his produce stand needed more than hope.
It's been terrible. Comparing to this month, to the past, this month is much better. Like we are doing a little better than past 12 months. It was really hard for us to get through.
Executive Director at Union Square Partnership Jennifer Fox says, although the district had suffered through the pandemic, the Green Market is the #1 foot traffic driver in the neighborhood. Fox said 33 businesses have opened or plan to open in the district since January 2020. He said pre-pandemic, 40 new businesses usually opened in the Union Square district each year. Now in business stories, most major European stocks are trading slightly higher as investors evaluate global market trends. Italy's FTSE MIB is leading the gains, adding close to 0.5%. The CAC 40 in Paris, Frankfurt's DAX and Pan-European Stock 600 have also gained marginally. However, London's FTSE is trading fractionally lower. Earlier, Asian markets traded mixed with Seoul's Kospi, Hong Kong's Hang Seng and Japanese shares gaining. Bourses in mainland China and Australia's ASX 200 slipped. Now let's have a look at the weather updates from around the world. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.